Is it a fire code issue, or can people stand at the back?
It's a fire code issue. They won't let anybody but a minion stand back here.
Kind of figured.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're going to be talking through the. Can you edit down?
Okay.
I don't actually need a mic because I teach at a college and I'm used to just talking to the back of the room. But so today's the topic for the next hour is writing hero stories for modern readers, and our panelists, I'd like them to introduce themselves, but I'll just start by introducing briefly. So we have Garth Reasby with Teleria Press, and Scott James Magner, who's got cool things that he's showing me. That is so clever for his work.
The best part about shameless self-promotion is the lack of shame.
And Patrick Rothfuss, if you guys would like to. Yeah, and I'm going to step back from mine because I'm hearing the echo coming back.
Okay.
Garth, would you like to just start talking about your current superhero project?
Sure. I'm Garth Reasby, one of the founders of Teleria Press. I am new compared to my esteemed colleagues here in the writing world, but my stories are, quite simply put, I guess, Avengers meets Bourne Identity. That's what most people describe them as. The main character is basically a female espionage agent who journeys into becoming a superhero.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I've been smoozing all weekend long, so this is the last panel I have to do. My name is Scott James Magner, and I make games. I have been writing hobby games, video games, card games, board games, whatnot, for about 20 years, and most of that time my fiction ambitions were somewhat suppressed, but a couple years ago I got with a good group of people and they were able to buy some of my stories, so now I write all sorts of things.
My name's Pat. My teacher voice isn't quite what it usually is. I'm a little sick today. I apologize for that. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. And I write, people call me epic fantasy, but I think that's only because my books are really long. I don't actually think I probably fit technically into epic fantasy. There's not armies clashing and all of that stuff. What I really am writing is heroic fantasy. And it's something I think about a fair amount, so that's what I do.
So, Pat, your thoughts on, in writing heroic fantasy, expectations of a modern audience, that kind of thing?
Well, when I started, when I started writing The Name of the Wind, I knew that I was really tired of reading the same story over and over and over again, because I'd been reading a fantasy novel a day for most of my life. And when you're 14 years old, like anything with a sword in it, is pretty cool. And then you get about 1,000 books in, and you're about 19 years old, and I go, yeah, a new book, and I pick it up, and I'm like, have I read this before? It feels like I've read this before. So I was tired of getting the same old again. And so I tried to do something a little different. I also wrote a really awful high school fantasy novel, which I gave up after somebody wrote in the margin, this seems pretty derivative. And I was furious, of course, because they didn't understand, obviously, what I was trying to achieve. Then I realized that they were right, and I was much more furious. And I had a big snit, and I quit writing prose for a while. And then when I went back, I actually made a list of the things that I didn't want. I'm like, I don't want the dwarf with the axe, and I don't want the elf with the bow, and I don't want the wizard with the staff, and I don't want dragons. That one took a weird turn in the revision process because I ended up with the dragon. but I did at the same time, I wanted people to read this book and feel the way that I felt when I was 15, reading The Hobbit, or reading Narnia, or reading Kern. You know, some of those great old stories. So I wanted that, but at the same time, I wanted it to be a little different than that. I wanted it to be a little fresher than that. So I don't know if that's not technically the modern audience, but you know, fantasy has now existed for long enough for it to have gone through a couple of generations, and any art form or medium tends to mature, and I think fantasy is just getting to the point as a genre where it's branching away from Tolkien and Tolkien clones. It's really firmly outside of that now, even though there is still a lot of, you know, Tolkien's shadow really long, his footprints are really deep in the genre. And I think a lot of people are really enjoying these non-Tolkien fantasies that get written these days. Blah, 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 that's a big rambling mess. Assume that I had a good conclusion, I just put that.
But it's an interesting question. Actually, Scott, I'm going to change the question up a bit for you, which is, so yeah, there is an issue with this you know, body of work that does feel, you know, to all of us now, derivative. How do you avoid that?
I was all ready to answer the other question.
Well, ask me.
The answer works both ways. For me, a hero is someone you can believe in, whether it's in fiction or in real life. It's somebody who is doing something that you admire, someone that you can pattern yourself after. You don't have to go out and, you know, build houses just because you like Jimmy Carter, but you should still understand that he's doing something he believes in. He believes in himself. You should believe in him too. When you're writing, the hero is not always the person you want to have in your book. You're going to have a protagonist who helps you move the plot from place to place to place. The hero comes in and does stuff, and that's not always the stuff you want to have done. And we, as consumers of media, we see heroes all the time on television, movies, even on the radio. We hear people sing songs about heroes, and it gives us kind of a skewed expectation as to what we're supposed to believe in and where we're supposed to pattern ourselves. So to avoid a derivative hero and to avoid tropes all the way around her, you just got to look at your own beliefs and the things that you want to see in the world and write about that.
Do I get a different question? Am I
No, I won't do that again. Keep going.
I don't have much to add to what Scott said here. I mean, it's just, you know, I think you really do have to make heroes feel like real people. If they don't feel like real people, everybody's Superman, and it's hard to believe them. I can't identify with Superman. You know, my whole planet wasn't blown up, or none of you would be here. You know, I can't throw mountains and, you know, things I touch don't crumble like tissue paper, so that'd be cool, but, you know, it's not happening. So you definitely have to find those things that draw people into that hero.
Go ahead. All right. I'm glad you brought up Superman, because Superman is the quintessential hero. He was the first costume superhero in comic books, right? But out of the myriad powers that our Kryptonian friend has had over the last 75, 80 years, his most important one is the one that never makes the books. It's his restraint. This guy can crack the planet in half if he wants to. But he never does. He never goes all the way. He never uses the full extent of his strength because he believes in a better world. And his belief in himself is the thing that we should admire. That's the part about Superman, is why people read Superman stories.
Well, actually, I'm going to be all contrarian here. I think we need to draw a distinction between a person we admire and someone who is a hero. And maybe even draw a line between someone who we view as heroic or like a heroic character. Because, you know, like, you say, oh, that person, there was the flood, and they went out into the flood and they saved that dog. That person is a hero. But yeah, and fair, right? You know, you saved a dog or whatever. You can be a hero. But I don't think that's what we're really talking about here. You know, and yeah, like Jimmy Carter, yes, Jimmy Carter. But that's not what we're talking about here either. We are talking about heroic characters, like the archetype of the hero. And now you don't necessarily need to swing all the way into Joseph Campbell, you know, or any of those, or freaking Jungian sort of thing there. But there is something about these heroic characters. We don't necessarily admire them. That's not a central element of their characters. Joseph Campbell, you know, he had the hero of 1,000 faces. Campbell said, a hero does these things, and then there's the descent to the underworld. And there was a lot of good stuff going on there. But if I was gonna put my finger on like a defining heroic characteristic, and here actually I'm gonna say I can address the modern audience. The modern audience actually tends to be very resistant toward classic heroes. I remember when my book was first published, I was sitting I went to a con and I was sitting at a table with a bunch of other writers. They all knew each other. I knew nobody. I'd never been to a con before. And there was one guy who was obviously the king of this little writers group. And he said, and he goes, that's right, your book is coming out. I read an ARC of that. He goes, your main character was kind of a Mary Sue, but you know, there was some good writing in there. And I said, what's a Mary Sue?
Yeah.
And everybody at the table did this. They went, like, how can you be a writer and not know what a Mary Sue is? I said, he goes, well, like, Mary Sue's the best at this. Mary Sue's the best at that. It's sort of a wish fulfillment character, and they're the best at everything. They're really good at all these things. And he talked about it for a while. I remember looking at him, and I remember thinking, dude, I don't want to read anything that you write. Because, like, I think of my favorite characters. Like, Cyrano de Bergerac is fucking awesome. Because he's a philosopher, and he is a poet, and he's proud, and he is, and he's got all this stuff going for him. Odysseus is awesome. You know, and he can make a fucking boat, and he tricks people, and he does, you know, and he does all these things. And Odysseus is not a fucking Mary Sue. And so I think there's this modern tendency to resist people who are really good at things. And so what you end up with is like these angsty, useless, whingy protagonists that I just want to slap and slap. But in that respect, I feel like I'm either old-fashioned or I'm just out of fashion, because I see that showing up in fiction again and again. And I'm like, why do I want to read about that sort of person? I don't particularly.
Well, question just before we down again with this cat, are there other classic or mythological heroes that you do look at as inspirational or as contributing elements to how you approach heroes?
I think Pat nailed it with Odysseus, right? It's called the Odyssey for a reason. You know, this guy got screwed royally by the gods over and over and over again, and he never gave up, right? He had to get home. That's what he wanted to do. He went and fought this stupid war. He won it. Somebody else took the credit. It's like, whatever. Get in my boat, and I'm going home. Come on, guys. And over the journey, you get down to Odysseus is left. Everyone else has been turned into pigs, or eaten, or killed, or fell overboard, or went off with the sirens. Doesn't matter. Odysseus, I gotta get home. And Odysseus gets home, and what does he find? His wife is surrounded by 50 guys who all say, I should be the king, I should be the king, I should be the king. The only person who recognizes him is his dog. Who dies. You know, and it's the kind of person, right? That's who the Greeks thought was awesome. The Greeks saw all of their best qualities embodied in this person, right? The accuracy of the story, you know, it's somewhat in question. But that's who they want to read about. That's why they talk about Deus Ex Machina, right? Every so often God will come down and it will fix things, because that's what they believed happened. The good things in your life came from the gods, or you were a hero and you did those things yourself. So as we get closer to the modern era and fiction started to reflect our lives a little better, we don't have a lot of heroes. So our heroes, the people we're reading about or seeing in media, became us. You know, just like the gods became us in fiction a long time ago, and that's right, they're whinging messes. I want to beat the shit out of some keep doing comic books. I stopped reading comics. I did. I stopped reading for a long time. I got back to them. I was like, all right, I used to love these comics. I should read them again. I should see what's going on. And reading this. What the hell is this, right? And so the best comic I've read in the last 20 years, hands down, is a book called Kingdom Come, which is what happens when Superman quits. And he comes back and says, you're all a bunch of assholes. I'm going to start kicking some asses, and then sooner or later you're going to pay attention, or I'm going to keep kicking you. And we want to see these good characters. We want to see people who give us something to strive towards. And if we don't get it, we should write it.
Updating back to the modern audience.
The second new Star Wars movie, you know, not to dig up old wounds here, but there's one particular moment, I'm pretty sure it's the second one. The Jedi are outside Amidala's room, Natalie Portman's room, I can't remember the character's name, but like they're protecting her, and like that big robot centipede comes in the window or whatever, and they're like outside, and they hear a noise inside. And so they burst in the door. Now, and this is, it's the best part of the movie. It's the only part of the entire movie that I remember. They burst in the door, and they look around, and one of them immediately takes off to like lightsaber the robot centipede or whatever, and the other one immediately jumps out the window. And like this is actually what I view as the true heroic element. There was a song. I'm gonna really date myself here. It was called Hero, and there was in the chorus. It said, and the reason that she loved him is the reason I loved him too. He never wondered what was wrong or right. He just knew. You know? And I'm like, that's a hero. You know, and it provides kind of a narrative tightness, and it's comforting because like the Jedi bursts in, he's like something, and he's like, there's gonna this, it's like, boy, I wonder if I jump out that window if I will die. He's just, because that's his fucking job. That's how he's wired. Out the window, and because this is happening in a narrative, we get the pleasure of seeing that behavior rewarded, which is something we do not often get to see in our real lives. The decisiveness, the immediacy actually being rewarded. I've always viewed that as being one of these primary heroic qualities that can transcend genre. You know, you can have it with a Jedi or a superhero or a Greek hero or anything, but it's, you know, Odysseus did not sit around a lot going, well, he did shit, and he went out and did it, and sometimes it went badly, and sometimes it didn't, but he's always decisive. He's always decisive. That's what I view as the core of heroism.
I think we still have a lot of those modern heroes. You look at firemen and policemen, and you know, back in Odysseus' time, those were warriors, right? And I know a lot of people look at police officers as enforcers, but you know, they're kind of the warriors, the cast of our society. you know, and firemen to a degree as well. They, you know, those people, you know, throw themselves into danger, and they don't usually ask why, and they don't usually say, oh, I got hurt, worry about me. They're like, did the person I went after, you know, survive this? That's the important part. And I think, you know, in modern times, you have to look in very different places for those heroes, but they're out there. I mean, that, you know, the guy riding a bike who jumps off his bike to rescue someone getting mugged, that's a hero. He made a decision. He could have gotten shot before he ever got near that person, but those people are out there every day in every city in America. And, you know, I think, you know, when I write modern stuff right now, so I try and push that into my books because I think, you know, that's familiar to people. People stop and they see what they see on the news and they're like, oh, these firemen did this and stuff. Being able to incorporate that into my characters, I think adds that modern feel to it.
Yeah, well, and you know, it is the whole warrior mentality that's interesting. The Greeks had it figured out. I mean, they had sussed out a bunch of stuff way back in the day, and we ignore that to our detriment. Odysseus is such a great hero, not because he's perfect, actually. He's a great hero because, I mean, the Greek definition of hero is a great person with a flaw. I mean, and it's not, the flaw is not a, oh, by the way, you should give him a flaw. It's like, with a flaw. And what eventually started happening in our fiction is they took out the flaw. And without the flaw, for one, the character is boring. And also the character does not generate their own conflict. And you need conflict in a good narrative. Like Odysseus is constantly fucking himself. Because his flaw is pride. That's the whole reason for the Odyssey. It's like he got snarky with the gods, and so they slapped him down, and then makes a bad choice with Circe, and he gets in trouble with that, and he makes bad choices. It generates conflict. That makes the story. As soon as you take the flaw out of the hero, you need to externalize a source of conflict, and that's where you get a villain. And so you get superheroes like Superman, who is effectively perfection, and he is inviolate and boring. I mean, he's an adolescent power fantasy, and he's satisfying in that regard, but over a long stretch, he's boring. That's why Batman is cooler than Superman. because Batman is really screwed up inside. And so Batman is inherently flawed. But what happens is if you pull the flaw out of the hero, you need to create this villain. But like, who ends up being the most interesting characters in these stories? The villains. The villains. And so I did do that deliberately when I set out to make this character. I'm like, I don't want to make everything powerful. I want this to be small. I want you to see the rise of this kind of an extraordinary person living an interesting life. You know, it doesn't need to be armies of orcs, doesn't need to be huge apocalypse, none of that. But I want him to be a hero. And so I went classic. And it's like, Thoth has so much hubris and so many of the worst things that happen to him. It's like, he does it to himself constantly. He makes such mistakes. And you know, that's one thing that I will say. You can either say that in the modern time, I think the kind of the whingy, weak protagonist is a reaction to the flawless hero, but it's the wrong pushback against that Superman mode. What you want is like go 2,000 years back, go right to the beginning, and have somebody awesome who's screwed up, and like that is what you can identify with. And it's like can I identify with Odysseus because he is a king? Can I identify with Odysseus because like he is a sailor and he is won a war? And oh no, it's like I can identify with Odysseus because he makes bad choices. And who's made a bad choice? Today. You know?
Yeah.
And that's what makes these characters compelling.
I write about a lot of broken people for that exact reason. Because if you're not broken yourselves, you don't have to admit it. You know somebody who is. You know someone who deals with their problems either poorly or well, and that's compelling to you because they're a part of your life. If we want to update the hero for the modern times, we have to make the people we write about appealing to us in some way. They've got to have the flaws, but they've also got to have something about them that makes them special. I mean, we shouldn't have 50 copies of Batman, 50 different titles starring Batman. I think we're up to 10 now. Right? And it's because DC was going to cancel Batman. Batman was on the chopping block in the 70s because of, after the brouhaha with Seduction of the Innocent, and DC Comics just got happy and smiling to the point where everyone was smiling on the covers all the time. And Batman sales were in the toilet, so they were going to cancel it. They were absolutely going to cancel it. And they gave it to Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams and said, do what you can with it, but we're probably going to get rid of it. And they said, Batman's a fucked up guy. Let's fuck him up. And they gave him a villain, and Ra's al Ghul is somebody who's better than Batman at everything and knows what his flaw is. And he just goes onwards, right? Yeah, Ra's al Ghul is an eco-terrorist who wants to kill 90% of the Earth's population because they're just not necessary.
That is yes. So I think if you guys have questions, we've got a microphone here in the center. We can start assembling for that. So with regard to the archetype, which I agree, and I look at just my own writing and how I look to Shakespeare and further back. Are there any traps, do you think, in doing a main character who is very archetypal?
They still have to be believable. And you have to be the person who believes it, because it shows in your writing every time. Like if you're writing the superhero and he's a superhero all the time, the audience knows you don't believe him. Right? It's just, you might as well be reading a comic book, and they cost a lot less.
I always struggled with the archetypes in college because I looked around me and everybody I knew was not an archetype. Everybody was a little bit good, a little bit bad, funny, like the trickster, or you have the shapeshifter. I think everybody, to some degree, is a shapeshifter. Everybody has these elements that define them more or less, and that's why I always had a hard time with Superman, right? I hate to rag on Superman all the time. He gets ragged on a lot, but he was unbelievable to me even as a kid. I was identified with Batman far more for some reason, and I had an interesting childhood, and I looked at the family members I had, and I was like, these people are not the hero, but they're not all bad. And I think that in my writing, I try to make my characters more, I don't know, I want to say gray. Everybody has more a strong point, but my characters tend to combine all the archetypes to some degree, because I want them to be real people.
Let's start with a question.
Hello, I'm listening to your presentation. Like what you had to say about the villains, because when you talk about the Superman and a lot of other villains, they're more or less there to give us hero something to do, something to defend against. He's like that. While something like Batman, he's basically fighting against reflections of himself, turn up to 11, and that combined with when he has to fight them and he's also trying to kill them, really says a lot about who he is and makes his villain some of the best. But what I wanted to ask you is, what should a villain be accomplishing in a story for the modern reader?
I would say if you have a villain in your story, you better have a reason for it. I would go farther than that, and I would say you probably shouldn't have a villain in your story. Because the only reason to have a villain is if you do not have a sufficiently complex protagonist. Or a sufficiently complex plot, or perhaps any plot. A lot of comic books don't have, these days it's a little different, but classically a lot of comic books didn't have a lot of plot. You have a villain who comes in and is robbing a bank, and then the hero fixes that, and then you're done. Now, you can have an antagonist and that's different. A villain is somebody it's Snidely Whiplash. Am I dating myself here? Where Snidely Whiplash is the big, and he ties little Nell to the railroad tracks, and Dudley Do-Right goes to save her, right? But here's the thing. Why? I mean, really, it's like, and he's just a villain. The only reason he's there is to take Nell, and so that Dudley Do-Right has something to do. He's, at best, a plot device, and at worst, a contrivance. There's nothing there. And honestly, it's like, if you're going to be an antagonist, it's like, maybe he has a fetish, like a train fetish? Honestly, it's like, if I kidnap, Dudley's girlfriend, it's like, if you're gonna be bad, I can think of a lot of things you can do with Nell, but what's the deal with the train? That's just like being bad for no reason at all. And this is what I think of, have you guys heard of the term uncanny valley?
Yeah.
It's when a face becomes like an animated face. It typically happens in computer animation, where the more realistic a face becomes, the more believable it is, until it gets so realistic that but it's not perfect, and then it freaks our shit.
I think of the Orville Redenbacher commercial they had a few years ago, where he was that 3D animation, you could just kind of see that there was something about him that was unnatural, and you're just like, I don't want to be this guy.
And so that's what happens. You get here, and then you get the uncanny valley. And then once you go back up to photorealistic perfection, then it's believable again, but it's that dip. I think of the uncanny valley of narrative, where it's like, I can understand somebody being a bad person and like taking a young woman to do terrible things, but I do not get tying her to a train track. Because like, who would do that? Similarly, like the classic villain in fantasy, somebody who's gonna destroy the world, it's like, all of your stuff is in the world. Who does that? It just makes no sense to me. And it doesn't make sense to anyone. And so you read the story and it's just, it wrecks your verisimilitude.
I can't really add much more to that. The question of why is something you should always ask yourself when you're writing. Why is the villain doing this? Or more importantly, why is the hero doing this? Right? There has to be a compelling reason for anyone to do anything in your book, because you're writing it down.
And also, how many people think they're villains, right? How many countries think they're villains? And, I don't write my antagonists as people who think they're evil. They don't think they're evil. They think they're just doing what they need to do to get whatever they want. And that's the way the world is.
For the project I'm working on right now, the villain is a scientist, and he wants to further scientific knowledge, and he absolutely doesn't think he's doing anything wrong. So, next question.
Yeah, so we're talking about heroes, and there's the obvious trope that, wait, you can't hear me?
No, we can hear you fine.
But
Just
you probably
move
should
the
come
line.
up just because they were recording this.
Oh, they are, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so there's the obvious trope that heroes win. And you kind of have this expectation that by the end of the book, the comic book, that they're going to make it out great and the villain loses. How do you deal with that expectation and keeping it fresh?
Why?
Yeah, I'm just saying.
No, really, why? Why does the hero have to win?
Well,
It's a classic format, right? It happened all the time, but that was just a way stories were structured. In Greek tragedies and Greek, and when we were making a play, it's like, oh, this is an easy way to end our story on a high point, right? But we don't have to do that anymore. I'm not sure Quoth is going to win at all.
I've seen the covers are pretty dark.
Right? But I keep reading, sorry, over and over again, 2 books.
It is, you have to be aware of, as a writer, you have to be aware of reader expectation. And typically in modern fantasy, the protagonists win. And so you need to be aware of that. Because if you depart from that and apart from that, without handling your readers carefully, then you will effectively have breached reader trust. And there's no worse thing you can do as a writer to effectively go against the kind of unspoken contract between reader and writer. There's certain unspoken rules.
I'm leaving.
A lot of Japanese anime and Japanese storytelling also, the hero may win, but it's the hero's side winning, because usually the hero's dead. And usually 7 or 8 heroes are dead,
Okay.
right? So I think culturally it also depends on, you know, if we're Western writers, we may tend to hang towards that hero winning, because that's what we get thrown at us as children and as we come up. And, you know, I loved just Japanese anime when I was a child, and, you know, Japanese mythology, and it was like, boy, these guys don't live, they all die. And, you know, or there's such a huge sacrifice that can you really call it winning?
And question just for you to ponder for yourself, does Frodo win?
Thank you.
Next question?
I guess it's kind of a take on your earlier talk about the Jedi jumping through the window. Kind of got me thinking about how does the modern hero handle justice, or how do you describe like the setup? I guess one of the things that one of my all-time favorite movies is Snake Eyes, actually with Nick Cage, just because it's this character that he isn't a hero in the strictest sense. You know, he's a dirtbag, but he makes a heroic decision, and even the end of the movie, nothing good happens to him. You know, he's a little bit of an anti-hero, I guess. But how do you set up justice in terms of like the end? Because I guess that's one of these readers resonate, is they want, you know, to see either their comeuppance or how you set up the story. How should it end?
I think those are two different questions.
I'm sorry.
I just think justice, I think those are, I think there's two things conflated in there, and I don't know how to separate them out to deal with them individually, because I'm fevered right now. I don't think justice is necessary, just because, again, if I write a story set in a completely just universe, it's going to bug everybody, because we know that's not the world. But I don't know where to go beyond that.
Are you more concerned about justice or a proper resolution?
Proper resolution,
Okay.
like in terms
So
of
the story needs to come to an end that you understand.
yes.
That not necessarily
Like the
just. Right. Pick a different Nick Cage movie, Face Off. Right. Both Archer and Troy are not the best people, but they're still going after the same sort of things. Right. And at the end, big spoiler, the bad guy loses. But he's already done all the damage he could possibly do. So he won. Where's the justice there? The justice is that he's not doing it anymore.
You know, it's not a bad question, but saying like, how do you get good resolution in a story is sort of like saying, so how do you fix a car? It's like there's no sensible way to answer it.
Well, it's also eye of the beholder. I mean, what is a proper resolution? You know, everybody has a different opinion on that, and you know, I think lots of readers will voice that opinion on the internet. You know, about different people's writings. I think there's an expected resolution frequently, and it's a culturally expected resolution, like I was saying with the Japanese mythology. But you know, I just try to make my resolution interesting and hopefully acceptable to what I have set up in the writing.
Earlier you used Greek culture, examples from Greek culture, to give us a clearer idea of what you're talking about with the hero. One of the things that we don't have that the Greeks did is a belief in the supernatural, or daily dealings with the supernatural being an accepted thing. If you're writing in a modern milieu, as we all are, how do you have any rules as to how or how not to introduce infuse supernatural elements into everyday living?
That's a really good point. However, I will actually, I'll come back and I'll say that we do like to think we're living in an age of reason. This is the information. I mean, we have Wikipedia. And so we all know the truth about everything, right? But I guarantee that everyone in here has superstitions. Has like things, and not just like, oh, my lucky pair of socks or whatever. I'm talking about, I guarantee every person in here has something that is so deeply rooted in their behavior that the thought of not doing it isn't just horrifying, it's something that you could not even conceive of not doing. You know, like for me, it's reading 2 books at once. It's not that it's wrong or not that it's unlucky. It's just like, why would you do that? You know, but like everybody has these things, and for a lot of people, I think their religion can fall under the realm of superstition. You know, a lot of people do believe that there are gods. I know a lot of people that do believe in magic of various sorts, whether they call it magic, or whether they think of it as karma, or good vibes, or feng shui, or any of these things. And so, if I was going to bring stuff into, say, an urban fantasy setting, that's how I would do it. I would look at how, like, everyday people, every day, deal with the mystical in their lives.
The Greeks' belief in the gods was to them part of their knowledge of the universe. That's how they thought everything worked, because there were titans, and then there were gods, and then there's us, and things flow downhill sometimes. Our modern conception of the universe involves, a singularity point expanding outwards forever, and physical laws, and we're testing things all the time. So our modern superstition is science. And it doesn't explain everything, it explains enough of how we understand the universe that we believe in it. Well, that's what the gods were for the Greeks. That was science. Why does the rain come? Well, because Zeus made it come. Later, when we perpetuate Zeus at the end of the year, we get crops, right? And so their understanding of the universe included gods, and it helped them to function. Ours includes science and gods. And, apple turnovers, right? When we're hungry, there's an apple turnover, and when I eat it, I'm not hungry anymore. So we do things that show us the universe works a certain way. In fiction, whether you put gods into your book or elements of the supernatural, I mean, I'll be honest, this is about zombies, right? But you have to make the zombies believable, and granted part of the world that they were presented in. And when you see the zombies and why they're there, you go, oh, yeah, I guess that could happen. And that's really what science fiction is the art of the possible.
I'll also add really quickly, we do very much like to think of ourselves as rational creatures, for the most part. But I would like to throw out the concept, I wish I could claim it for my own, I wish I could attribute it to the appropriate person. There's a difference between daytime logic and nighttime logic. It's very true. Who's woken up in the middle of the night and you're pretty sure that there's someone outside your window? And you know there's not, right? But do you go look? Absolutely not. Because that's nighttime logic. And that's superstition.
Yes.
That's
okay.
And honestly, this is where we live during the day. This, in the lizard part of our brain, is where we live at night. And nothing ever struck this home so much for me, because I went to see the Blair Witch Project way back in the day. Except it caught a matinee, so you watch it, and you're like, and then I leave the theater, and it's a sunny Saturday afternoon, and I'm like, oh, that was a creepy movie. And then I go up to my dad's cabin in the woods, because it's, it's summer, and we're going to visit my dad. And And that night, I'm like, I'm gonna go look at the stars. And I open the door, and it's out in the middle of the North Woods of Wisconsin. And I look out, and I'm like, and then this part of my brain goes, walk your ass right out there, Rothfuss, because you're not a monkey. You know that there's nothing out there. And I'm like, no. And I'm like, you're gonna walk to the end of the driveway at the very least. You're gonna do it just to prove that you are a human being. And I didn't. And I didn't.
So I think we have time for like one more question.
So one of the things that you've talked a lot about in this panel is sort of the decisiveness of the hero. The hero knows right from wrong for sure. He just knows. The hero jumps out the window without thinking about it. The hero does stuff. So in that framework, how do you deal with doubt, especially self-doubt, for a hero? Without being whingy.
I don't think the hero knows right from wrong necessarily. They know the right thing to do. Right? I believe the hero knows right from wrong. That's otherwise it's a thing. But the right thing to do is the thing to do. Doubt is fear. It's just changed its target. And so it's okay to not believe you can do something as long as you do it anyway.
Well, my background's in like security and executive protection and such, and I'll tell you, when something actually happens, you don't really have a whole lot of time for doubting. It's like you've been trained and you've got this muscle memory stuff going on, and you just kind of do it. And afterwards, you're like, I don't know that I should have gone quite that far. Maybe I didn't go far enough, but it's more of a reflective doubt that you're preparing yourself for the next sort of encounter, I think. And every single time I had to get in a physical situation, I never had any kind of doubt. It was like, I just need to do something now, or I'm not going to be around to do it.
Or there's like doubt about what you should do. And then there's kind of, almost I think of it more as existential doubt. Sometimes I read books or manuscripts by people who are trying to get published. And one of the things that I hate to see is characters endlessly bickering about nothing. And it comes from a good place because the writer knows that they want tension in the scene. But the only way they can think to add tension is by making people fight. But they don't have anything to fight about, so they just fight. They just bicker, they snark at each other. They get offended at things that normal people would never get offended at. And because it's substanceless, it comes off as irritating and fake. Similarly, legitimate doubt about legitimately troubling things is legitimate. And so, like, having a character experience that doubt or think about that doubt or talk about that doubt with somebody, that's one thing. However, a character who at their very core is constantly spiraling in doubt, I think that is not to a purpose. I mean, that could very well count as your heroic flaw. Constant self-doubt and flagellation. The problem is that it is not a compelling flaw. That's not something that goes out and creates problems. That's something that makes you sit in your room and, like, obsess. And that's
It's
not
annoying to read too.
Exactly, and it doesn't make for a good story. Somebody who's proud and therefore goes out and screws things up, that makes for a dynamic story. So I would say purposeful doubt is okay, but doubt for doubt's sake, anything for just to have it, if it's not substantiated somehow, that's always going to end up coming off as fake, and it just doesn't have good service to the story.
Thank you.
Okay. So many thanks to our panelists here. Thank you all for being here.
May I please have you exit out the back door? Thank you. Hi.
Yeah.